Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Okay, so what is our agenda today? We'll be talking about an antimalarial medicine that was launched in 2012. And we will be talking about neglected tropical diseases and alternative ways of developing medicines, right? So this is the whole agenda. So we'll come, what is at stake here? So the question is, how can we develop a commons of medicine? How a commons of medicine is possible? Can it be done? Is it possible? So what is commons? Before we start, commons, just for our understanding, is a resource that can be shared with a broader society. It can be natural resources, for example, environment, oceans, but it can be, these are tangible things, but it can also be intangible, like knowledge itself, the creation of knowledge as commons. Or, for example, the good example is Wikipedia. It is a knowledge common made by and maintained by the community, society at large. So here the idea is, how can we create medicines, generate medicines, so that it can be shared equitably with a wider society, people, those like who need it. So the outline of the presentation, first we will talk very briefly about what are neglected tropical diseases. Then why do we need alternative R&D? Is it really necessary to have alternative R&D? Then emergence of product development partnerships, PDPs, as an alternative way to do R&D. And then we will talk about a special PDP, which is Medicines for Malaria Venture, and the development of this drug, which is called Synriam. Finally, in our last part, we will talk about what did we learn from the development of Synriam. Okay, so let's start. Context. What are entities? So as it says, neglected tropical diseases. So they are neglected and they are tropical, in the sense that their burden of disease, of these diseases, is disproportionately high in developing countries, in the global south. So Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And they are neglected. Neglected by whom? Neglected by pharmaceutical companies, because they don't have this is a very small market. A small market in the sense this market is small in terms of profits, because patients are poor, governments are resource constrained. So it is not for business, it is not very lucrative. All these diseases are infectious, most of them. So leishmaniasis, sleeping sickness, filariasis, trachoma, Buruli ulcer. But what we know more about them is the big three: HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. And they have been at the heart of, so far, until now, at the discussion of or investment of alternative R&D. Again, why HIV/AIDS? It is not as such, we can argue it is not a neglected disease, because there has been lots of research into HIV. The problem is that when medicines exist for this disease, mostly medicines don't exist in many cases, and when they exist, they are not adapted to the needs of patients. For HIV, the case is pediatric patients, like children. The medicines are not adapted to their need. So let's move forward. The need for alternative R&D. In 2009, a paper was published by Global Forum of Health Research, and they said that, guys, this is the case. 90% of the population, the investment into R&D is totally neglects 90% of the global population. Only 10% of the R&D is targeted to those people. Then again, two landmark papers were published with Truyer et al. In 2002 and Pedrick in 2013. And they found, just the summary of two papers is that between 1975 and 2011, only 20 medicines were developed out of 1729 new chemical entities that were targeting neglected tropical diseases. That is 1.1%, which is really negligible. And given that 11% of the global disease of burden is because of neglected tropical diseases, and when we move to sub-Saharan Africa, it rises to 32%. So this is the need. That's why we need alternative forms of R&D, so that they can focus on these particular diseases. How do we do it? So these product development partnerships have come as an alternative. They are private organizations. They are not for profit, and they are really self-governing and global in nature. They are driven by public health needs. They are not driven by making profits, because they are not profitable. And their whole idea is to deliver medical technologies, which is drugs, vaccines, diagnostics, and even like insecticidal nets, bed nets for malaria. And they started as social experiments because some people thought like, okay, this system is not working, we need something else. So they started as an experiment. Nobody knew how successful it would be in the beginning. And they wanted to address the market failure. There was no investment into R&D for NTDs, and they wanted to create something different. What these product development partnerships do is that they act as virtual pharmaceutical companies. Why virtual? Because in-house R&D capability is very limited. Only few things are in-house, done within the PDP itself. But most of it is distributed to partners. So they take the pharmaceutical value chain, divide it into little pieces, and give it to different partners that you are developing this, you are developing this part. And then finally, a whole product comes to the market. So they act as a bridge between public and private sector. Okay, so in public sector, there are researchers who want to work on entities, but they don't have money or there is no enough funding for it. And pharmaceutical companies, this market is not lucrative. They create incentives for both of them. They align their needs. And this is, that's how they act as integrators, because this is their role of integration of different entities into the society, who if they had worked alone, they would not have achieved the goal, but together they could. And they are brokers of innovation. The brokerage function comes from making these diseases as an agenda for global public health, because when MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, were announced in 2000, neglected tropical diseases were into other diseases. So it was HIV, malaria, and other infectious diseases. And now in Sustainable Development Goals, we have HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and neglected tropical diseases, and then hepatitis. So we see that the agenda has changed, and product development partnerships have done a lot of advocacy to make this entities as global public health agenda. And each PDP is different. So they target on a particular disease, but even within the disease, they can target on a particular type of product. So Medicines for Malaria Venture is like focuses on developing medicines for malaria. But at the same time, Malaria Vaccines Initiative focuses on developing vaccines for malaria. So this was PDPs. Now, what is Synriam and what is MMV? So MMV came out in 1999 with the help of public and private organizations, which is like Government of Switzerland, UK DFID, Global Government of Netherlands, World Bank, Rockefeller Foundation. And their idea was that, okay, we will chip in some money and we will try to catalyze the R&D into malaria. What we see is that within last almost 20 years, less than 20 years, the malaria R&D medicine market has changed. In the beginning, they started with 10 products. Now they have almost 10 products in market. And they're working on 47 different independent projects for malaria. So it completely changed the malaria medicines landscape. Now, what is Synriam? Of course, it's a new antimalarial drug. It was the product of two public-private partnerships. First was between MMV and different multiple partners. We will see it later. And second was between Ranbaxy and Government of India. Arterenone, which is one of the components in this medicine, Synriam is made up of two medicines. So one of these medicines is a new chemical entity that has come out in decades. It's the first new antimalarial medicine to come out in decades. And it was authorized in 2011. Its advantage is that the current gold standard of treatment for malaria, patients have to take 6 pills, maybe 12 pills, depending upon their age and weight. But Synriam reduces that burden. It's only 3 pills in 3 days, so patient adherence. And then it is synthetic, so industrial scale-up is possible. So development timeline of Synriam, how Synriam was developed. So in 2000, MMV became operational. 2002, Arterenone was developed in US by Professor Jonathan Vannerstorm and his team. And in 2003, MMV found that, okay, from lab, we have to take it to market. We need a pharmaceutical partner, and Ranbaxy was selected. Clinical trials started in 2004. In 2006, the problem started in Synriam. The problem started because MMV was not happy with the results of clinical trial. And MMV said that, okay, we are not giving you more money for this project anymore because the medicine with the blood concentration of the medicine was not high, so more medicine was supposed to be given to patients, and MMB was not happy with this. But Ranbaxy said that we want to continue the project. So MMB pulled out, and Ranbaxy signed a partnership with Government of India. Finally, we leave this, we go to 2011. It was approved by Government of India in 2011 and finally launched in 2012. By 2015, it was registered in 12 African countries and launched in 9. So this is the history of development of Synriam so far. So what did we learn from it? We will talk 4 different things. First, necessity of an innovation ecosystem. Second, processing of intellectual property rights. Third, creation of institutional markets. And fourth, the role of funding. So this is the innovation ecosystem. If we see how MMV came to develop this innovation ecosystem, and if we see there are diverse set of actors here. First, project actually started in mid-90s in Roche, but Roche decided to leave the project because malaria was not interesting for Roche. Roche gave some of its technology to Swiss TPH. When MMV became operational in 2000, this project went to MMV, and this is the MMV phase. So there were universities globally distributed, US, Monash University in Australia, and Swiss TPH doing different parts of the discovery. Then some pharmaceutical companies were working on pro bono basis because some people have more need to contribute to society. Then there were funding agencies which are very diverse. Again, we have government, we have philanthropic agencies. And then we have contract organizations which are again both public and private. We have Quintiles in London, which is a private firm, but we have Mahidol University and Indian Council of Malaria Research which are public. And this is the second phase. We will talk about it later. Okay, so what did we see? That the problem here with medicines is that it does not exist naturally. It is not in nature. It is not present. There needs to be active R&D to develop the medicine, and it can be a very long process. It can be more than 10 years and is still very uncertain. So creation of an ecosystem is an essential part, that the whole value chain, there is someone to do some research, someone to bring it to the market, do registration. How this is something which is away from a firm-centric model. Okay, because firm-centric model, firms decide what kind of research they want to do. Here, firms don't decide the research. The research is decided by the PDP, and then they find the partner. So which is the role inverses. And these ecosystems are complex because each partner has different capabilities, and they are not geolocalized. There is not like they are not in one place. Each of the partner is different. So it is again an example of open innovation, in the sense that PDP needs a partner. It can be anywhere. If we find a talented partner somewhere else in the world, in any part of the world, they make a partnership with them. So it is a global knowledge infrastructure. The knowledge infrastructure is distributed throughout the world. But complexity doesn't arise there. Complexity arises because there is not one innovation ecosystem. We see here that there is one product. And innovation ecosystem was surrounded around the product. But as we have seen earlier, MMV, Medicines for Malaria Venture, has 47 projects. It means 47 innovation ecosystems. Okay, and it is distributed throughout the world. So it is a very complex, it becomes very complex. And then you have to see that there is not one PDP. There are more than 20 PDPs active in the currently. And if we take all of them, in last 20 years, they have really created a parallel way of doing, an alternative way of doing R&D, which is not dependent upon the traditional system, the closed R&D of pharmaceutical industry. Again, they work within the general institutional environment, regulations like safety, drug efficacy for clinical trials. The rules, they are not changing, but we will see later that they are playing with the rules. So the problem here is how to align incentives. As we saw, the partnership between Ranbaxy and MMV broke because the vision of the world was not same. What is an ideal product? Okay, so the partnership broke. So this is a very complex task. Second is distribution of rights. Rights is at what price I bring the medicine into the market. Usually it is the pharmaceutical companies who decide. What is an innovation here? The partnership broke. But the initial contract of MMV and Ranbaxy said that there will be two markets. There will be public and private market. And So Ranbaxy has to make a separation. In public market, Ranbaxy could charge whatever price it wanted. In private market, Ranbaxy could charge whatever price it wanted, but in public market, the price was negotiated. So cost plus a little bit of profit. And this is something which is a recurrent theme in PDP market. There are two more examples of antimalarial medicines that were developed. One was with DNDi and Sanofi, and another was with DNDi and Cipla. And both of them, there was a difference between public and private market. So they are not changing the intellectual property. It is not the absence of intellectual property, but how intellectual property will be used, how a pharmaceutical company will use the right. And this is something that reminds of copyleft and floss movement. What is copyleft is Creative Commons, for example. We can talk about Creative Commons, that we don't lose authorship, but other people have right to distribute it. Same with open source software. And so the whole idea here remains like for socially optimal outcome between a pure public good and a pure private good, lots of different possibilities are there. And PDPs there is no one fixed set of rule that we will do this. But the only idea is that whatever the outcome would be, it should be socially optimal. Okay. Product needs a market. Okay. Suppose a product is developed. It is a very nice product. It is safe, effective. It is perfect, adapted to the needs of patients. But what we will do if there is no market? Because the first problem, the very problem, the root cause of market failure is that patients are poor and governments don't have money. They are resource constrained. So what we see from the success of the big three, HIV, TB and malaria, the scale up of treatment was only possible because there was a globally subsidized market by international organizations. Otherwise it would not have happened. And what we see here, that in case of Ranbaxy, the product was developed, but it was not within the PDP. It was after PDP partnership with Government of India. And Ranbaxy launched the market only in the private sector. Why public sector was not there? Because the medicine is not approved by WHO as of now. It means Ranbaxy cannot supply to government or donor funded market, which is the biggest market in these diseases. It means that even if the product was launched, there was no institutional market, so there is no intake, there is no demand. Okay, the demand is only in the private market, which is a small section. Okay, so when we see in the case of neglected tropical diseases, the big funding only exists for these three diseases, HIV, TB and malaria, not for other neglected tropical diseases. So that is something, a very hazy situation, how it would be done if new medicines come to market for leishmaniasis, for example. Okay, funding is critical. MMB said after investing almost $29 million that, okay guys, we are not interested in this research, it is not according to our profile, we leave it. MMB knew that it is possible to make a combined medicine, but still MMB decided that we want to quit. Why it was possible? Because the funding that was coming was from philanthropic organizations or government, so there was no shareholder. So Ranbaxy, MMB does not need to prove that, okay, how much profit we will generate from this. This is actually a very important factor because it gives a structural power to PDPs to negotiate the terms and conditions. That, okay, we are giving you money, we are financing clinical trials, now you have to reduce the price. Okay, so this is something, it only comes, this delinkage of R&D cost from the final product, it only comes because of this institutional funding. The problem here is that until 2015, nearly half of all PDPs received more than half of their funding from a single source, which is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This is not an ideal situation because you need to put your eggs in different baskets. If one day Gates Foundation decides not to fund, it's doomed. What do we see from the case of Synriam is that Government of India actually financed this medicine in the later phases of clinical trial. And this is an essential thing because most of the burden of disease is located into few fast developing countries, which is India, Brazil, China, Indonesia, Argentina. And it is possible that because these countries can actually finance, they are in a position to finance. But why not reduce the uncertainty? Because in the early stages of pharmaceutical R&D, uncertainty is high. But in later stages of clinical trial, uncertainty is low. And this countries can actually become a partner in the later stages of pharmaceutical R&D. Also, it is very reputational. For India, India funded it because it was really a reputational factor, and it was really announced that the first medicine developed by an Indian company, which was not true because it was not developed by an Indian company. The invention was, it was a global invention. Okay, so to summarize, 4 things we need if we want to develop alternative commons of medicine. First is how to generate knowledge, which is PDPs are showing through creation of an innovation ecosystem. Second is socially optimal processing of intellectual property. So it does not need to be pure private property. There must be conditions attached to how rights will be used regarding a product. Pricing, quantity, where it should be distributed first. Third, construction of an institutional market. Without an institutional market, given the current situation of global economy, it is not possible to scale up of treatment. And this we know very well from the case of HIV, TB and malaria. And new avenues of funding. Funding is necessary. The funding is limited. There is no machine to print money. We need new sources of funding, and developing countries now need to share responsibility, and it is possible that some of them can, at least fast growing developing countries. So these are some selected references in case you are interested, and I would like to thank all the interview participants and Professor Benjamin Correa and Fabian Orsi for their guidance, and all the funding agencies. So thank you. If you have any question,